I watched the escorts close in, knowing the gap would vanish if I waited another minute. The orders were clear, but the sea kept proving them incomplete. When the torpedo turned back on me, the system I trusted offered no correction. I went down, knowing how much had been taken and what it had cost. By October 1944, the Western Pacific had become a zone of constant movement and attrition. American carrier strikes were pressing toward the Philippines, and Japanese naval planners were struggling to maintain shipping lanes that fed fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements to scattered garrisons. Submarine patrol lines stretched across the East China Sea and the approaches to Formosa, tasked with isolating Japanese forces by attacking merchant traffic and escort vessels alike. The environment was crowded, shallow in places, and increasingly dangerous as Japanese anti-submarine tactics improved in response to earlier losses. In this operational setting, the United States Navy submarine USS Tang SS-306 began her fifth war patrol. She departed Midway in late September under the command of Lieutenant Commander Richard H. O'Kane. The boat was a Balao-class boat, outwardly similar to many others in the Pacific Fleet, with no distinguishing features that suggested an unusual patrol ahead. Her orders were routine: patrol assigned waters in the Formosa Strait, report enemy traffic, and attack targets of opportunity in accordance with standing doctrine. O'Kane himself was not new to combat, though he was still relatively young in rank. He had previously served as executive officer aboard USS Wahoo, one of the most aggressive submarines of the early war, and had learned attack procedures under Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton. Those experiences shaped his approach to submarine warfare, emphasizing close tracking, repeated attack runs, and careful observation of enemy reactions. By 1944, such methods were no longer novel, but they were not universally practiced. Many commanders preferred greater distance and caution as Japanese escorts became more capable. Aboard Tang, daily routine filled the long transits between contacts. Watches were stood in 4-hour rotations. The boat ran submerged during daylight hours to avoid aerial patrols and surfaced at night to charge batteries and ventilate the interior. Crewmen maintained torpedoes, adjusted gyro settings, and logged engine performance. In the control room, O'Kane reviewed charts and intelligence summaries, noting recent sightings of convoys moving between China, Formosa, and the Philippines. The Formosa Strait presented particular challenges. Traffic density was high, but so was enemy vigilance. Japanese destroyers and smaller escorts regularly patrolled the area, using sonar and depth charges with increasing competence. Water depth varied sharply, limiting maneuvering room for submarines under attack. Air patrols from nearby bases added further risk, especially during daylight. As Tang approached her patrol area in mid-October, radio intelligence indicated heightened Japanese activity. Convoys were being rerouted more frequently, and escorts were assigned in greater numbers. Japanese naval doctrine emphasized aggressive counterattack once a submarine was detected, even at the expense of convoy cohesion. This created both danger and opportunity. Escorts that pressed too hard sometimes exposed themselves. On the bridge during nighttime surface runs, O'Kane and his officers scanned the horizon through binoculars, watching for silhouettes or faint smoke trails. Contacts were logged cautiously. The submarine remained undetected in the early days of the patrol, but sightings were fewer than expected. Several nights passed without confirmed targets, suggesting either improved Japanese evasive measures or changes in shipping schedules. Within the boat, torpedo maintenance became a quiet concern. Although improvements had been made since the unreliable Mark 14 torpedo of earlier years, failures still occurred. Magnetic exploders had largely been disabled, but contact exploders could still malfunction at oblique angles. O'Kane discussed firing solutions with his torpedo officer, emphasizing precise setup and conservative assumptions about target behavior. The crew was aware of the broader context. By 1944, American submarines had inflicted severe losses on Japanese merchant shipping, forcing the Navy to divert destroyers from fleet operations to escort duty. This redistribution strained Japanese resources, but also concentrated experienced crews in anti-submarine roles. Encounters were no longer one-sided. The first firm contact of the patrol came after several days of relative quiet. A radio operator reported multiple surface targets at long range during a night surface run. The contacts appeared to be moving in formation, speed consistent with a convoy. O'Kane ordered a cautious approach, remaining on the surface to close distance while adjusting course to avoid detection. As the submarine drew nearer, the silhouettes resolved into merchant vessels with escorts stationed ahead and astern. The formation was tighter than those encountered earlier in the war, indicating disciplined escort procedures. O'Kane chose not to attack immediately. Instead, he tracked the convoy from a distance, observing escort patterns and noting changes in speed and formation at dawn. At daylight, Tang submerged and continued to shadow the convoy periscope deep. Visibility was limited, and the escorts occasionally altered course, suggesting they suspected a submarine presence even without firm contact. Several times sonar pings were audible, though none appeared directed precisely at Tang. The operational problem became clear. Aggressive pursuit risked detection, but excessive caution could allow the convoy to slip away entirely. By late afternoon, the convoy altered course towards shallower waters near the Chinese coast. O'Kane assessed the situation carefully. Shallow depths would restrict diving angles and reduce escape options if detected. At the same time, coastal traffic was often less well coordinated, with escorts rotating in and out near port approaches. O'Kane decided to disengage temporarily, allowing the convoy to pass while repositioning for a possible night attack. This decision reflected a balance between patience and intent, a hallmark of his command style. The crew prepared for surface action after sunset, checking engines and clearing the bridge. Night brought limited opportunity. Weather conditions deteriorated slightly, with scattered clouds reducing moonlight. Radio contacts reappeared, but the convoy had spread out, and escorts were maneuvering unpredictably. Tang closed to attack range on one merchant vessel, but an escort crossed her path unexpectedly, forcing a sharp turn away. The attack was aborted. The near miss underscored the limitations imposed by the environment. Japanese escorts were faster and more alert than earlier in the war, and the margin for error was shrinking. O'Kane convened a brief discussion with his officers, reviewing what they had observed. The convoy's discipline suggested recent training improvements, and the escort's willingness to maneuver aggressively indicated confidence. Over the next day, Tang encountered similar difficulties. Several radar contacts dissolved before attack positions could be reached. In one instance, a lone escort appeared without visible merchants, suggesting decoy or independent patrol operations. Each encounter provided data, but no results. The lack of immediate success did not indicate failure, but it did test the patrol's assumptions. Traditional expectations of predictable convoy behavior were no longer reliable. O'Kane adjusted his approach, instructing his team to focus on the escort's movements rather than merchant silhouettes, reasoning that understanding the escort's patterns would reveal openings. By the fourth day in the patrol area, fuel consumption and battery usage remained within planned limits, but time was passing. Japanese traffic patterns were evolving faster than earlier intelligence had suggested. O'Kane noted this in the patrol log, aware that such observations would be valuable even if attacks remained limited. Late that afternoon, another radar contact appeared, closer to Tang's position than previous ones. Initial plotting suggested a smaller formation, possibly a resupply group rather than a major convoy. The contact speed was moderate, and escort movements appeared less coordinated. O'Kane ordered the submarine to shadow the group through dusk, maintaining distance while refining the firing solution. As darkness fell, the situation remained unresolved, balanced between opportunity and risk.
The patrol had yet to produce results, but patterns were emerging that would shape decisions to come. The boat continued on its assigned course, crew alert and systems ready as the operational picture slowly clarified. The conditions were set, though the outcome was not yet apparent.
By the evening of October 20, 1944, USS Tang had been operating in the Formosa Strait long enough for patterns to become visible. Japanese shipping was not absent, but it was cautious, fragmented, and heavily screened. Convoys were smaller than those encountered earlier in the year, and escort commanders appeared more willing to break formation to investigate uncertain contacts. This behavior reduced the predictability on which many submarine attack plans relied. The group detected late that afternoon resolved into 2 merchant vessels escorted by several smaller warships, likely Kaibokan or older destroyer types. Their spacing was irregular, suggesting either recent assembly or a lack of unified command. From a distance, the formation appeared vulnerable, yet closer observation revealed frequent course changes and overlapping escort patrols. O'Kane chose to remain patient. Rather than force an approach immediately, he tracked the group's movement through early night hours. The submarine stayed surfaced beyond visual range, using radar intermittently to avoid detection. Each radar sweep was brief, minimizing emissions that could alert Japanese radar warning receivers, which had become more common by late 1944. As darkness deepened, the escort's pattern became clearer. One vessel consistently ranged ahead of the merchants, while another lingered astern. A third moved in a wide arc to port, occasionally closing distance before falling back again. The pattern suggested a rotating search, but one that left temporary gaps. Shortly after midnight, O'Kane maneuvered Tang to exploit one such gap. He ordered a surface approach at moderate speed, keeping the submarine silhouette aligned with the darker horizon. The goal was to close firing distance without drawing attention from either escort or merchant lookouts. The approach was nearly complete when an unexpected complication arose. A separate contact appeared on radar, approaching from the northeast at higher speed. Its profile suggested a destroyer operating independently. Whether it was part of the original group or a separate patrol was unclear, but its course intersected Tang's intended attack track. O'Kane ordered a turn away and reduced speed. The submarine slipped back into darkness as the fast-moving contact passed without apparent detection. The delay cost position. By the time the destroyer moved off, the original group had altered course slightly, tightening its formation. Recognizing that the opportunity had passed, O'Kane disengaged again. The submarine submerged before dawn and resumed shadowing at periscope depth. The decision reflected a growing pattern. Repeated approaches frustrated by unexpected escort behavior and compressed timelines. During daylight hours, Japanese air activity increased. Aircraft were heard overhead several times, though none appeared to detect Tang. The presence of air patrols further restricted maneuvering, forcing the submarine to remain deeper and reducing visual observation opportunities. The operational problem intensified. Each day spent shadowing reduced available time in the patrol area, yet premature attacks risked revealing the submarine's position without meaningful results. Japanese escorts, even when not detecting Tang directly, were shaping the environment through constant motion and pressure. On October 21st, another convoy contact developed, this one larger and better organized. Radar indicated multiple merchant vessels with at least 4 escorts. The convoy maintained steady speed and course, suggesting confidence in its protection. O'Kane evaluated the formation carefully, considering options for a night surface attack. That night, weather conditions were less favorable. Cloud cover was inconsistent, and intermittent moonlight exposed the sea surface at irregular intervals. These conditions complicated visual detection, but also increased the risk of being silhouetted during an approach. Despite the risks, O'Kane attempted to close distance. The submarine advanced slowly on the surface, engines barely above idle. At approximately 3,000 yards, an escort altered course sharply, heading directly towards Tang's estimated position. Whether this was coincidence or a reaction to radar contact could not be determined. O'Kane ordered an immediate dive. Tang submerged rapidly, leveling off at depth as sonar pings followed. Depth charges detonated several hundred yards away, then closer. The escort conducted a brief search pattern, dropping additional charges before moving on. Damage was minimal, but the message was clear.
Japanese detection and response times had improved. After the attack, Tang remained deep for several hours. When conditions allowed, she surfaced cautiously to recharge batteries. The crew inspected for leaks and equipment damage. The encounter had not been severe, but it reinforced the narrowing margin for error. Over the next 2 days, similar patterns repeated. Contacts appeared, approaches were attempted, and escorts disrupted attack plans through either deliberate action or unpredictable movement. In one instance, a merchant vessel separated briefly from its escort, only to be rejoined moments before Tang could achieve firing position. These repeated frustrations began to highlight a disconnect between expectations and reality. Doctrine assumed that aggressive maneuvering and persistence would yield opportunities, but the evolving Japanese escort tactics were reducing those opportunities more effectively than earlier assessments suggested. O'Kane adjusted again, emphasizing observation over immediate action. He directed his officers to log escort speeds, turning radii, and reaction times. The data suggested that escorts were operating under standing orders to investigate any anomaly, even at the risk of leaving merchants temporarily uncovered. This aggressiveness created brief windows but also increased danger. Escorts that pressed attacks could force submarines deeper or disrupt carefully planned approaches, even without achieving positive detection. The system favored defense through constant pressure rather than perfect awareness. By October 23rd, fuel and torpedo inventories remained adequate, but time was becoming critical. The patrol area assignment would not be extended indefinitely, and the cumulative effect of repeated disengagements weighed on both crew and commander. Morale remained steady, but the absence of results contrasted sharply with earlier patrols in less contested waters. Late that evening, radar detected a solitary warship moving at high speed. Its size and profile suggested a destroyer operating independently, possibly on anti-submarine patrol. O'Kane chose not to engage, noting that isolated escorts often maneuvered aggressively and could draw a submarine into a prolonged chase with little payoff. Instead, Tang altered course to avoid the contact, remaining on the periphery of the patrol area. This maneuver brought the submarine closer to coastal traffic routes, where traffic was less predictable but sometimes less well protected. In the early hours of October 24th, new radar contacts appeared. This group was smaller than previous convoys, with indications of mixed vessel types. Escort spacing was uneven and speed was slower. The formation appeared to be transiting rather than maneuvering defensively. O'Kane began a careful approach, balancing caution with intent. The situation differed subtly from earlier encounters. Escorts did not range as widely, and their course changes were less frequent. Whether this reflected fatigue, differing command, or simple coincidence was unclear. As dawn approached, Tang remained in position, submerged and tracking. The submarine had not fired a torpedo on this patrol, but the accumulated observations were shaping a revised understanding of Japanese escort behavior. The operational problem was no longer simply finding targets, but choosing the moment when escort discipline faltered just enough to permit attack. The patrol entered a new phase, defined less by scarcity of targets than by the challenge of timing and risk. The next decisions would test whether patience and observation could translate into results under increasingly constrained conditions.
By October 24, 1944, USS Tang had been on station long enough that the accumulated observations began to alter Lieutenant Commander O'Kane's approach. The Japanese escorts encountered during the patrol were not uniformly effective, but they were persistent. Their strength lay less in precise detection than in sustained pressure. They maneuvered often, reacted quickly to uncertain contacts, and rarely held rigid patterns for long. This reduced the effectiveness of standard intercept techniques that depended on predictability. The small group detected in the early hours of October 24 continued on a steady course through daylight. From periscope depth, O'Kane observed 2 merchant ships and at least 2 escorts. Unlike earlier formations, the escorts maintained closer proximity to the merchants and did not range widely. Sonar pings were intermittent but not aggressive. Air patrols were absent for much of the day, likely due to weather inland. The reduced activity suggested either a lower priority transit or a temporary gap in coordinated coverage. O'Kane noted the difference carefully. He remained submerged throughout the day, conserving batteries and minimizing exposure. The submarine's position relative to the group remained favorable, slightly ahead and to one side, allowing options once darkness fell. As evening approached, the formation made a gradual course adjustment toward deeper water. This change eased some of the navigational constraints that had complicated earlier approaches. Water depth would permit greater maneuvering if an attack drew a response. The escorts maintained their spacing, but their course changes were less frequent, suggesting confidence rather than vigilance. After sunset, Tang surfaced at a distance and began a slow approach using radar sparingly. The sea state was moderate, with low swells that helped mask the submarine's silhouette. Cloud cover reduced moonlight, creating conditions that favored surface action without completely obscuring targets. O'Kane assessed the situation against the accumulated experience of the patrol. Earlier attempts to force an attack position had repeatedly been frustrated. This time, he chose a different approach. Rather than closing directly on the merchants, he maneuvered to draw closer to the escort's outer movements, watching for a moment when their attention drifted outward rather than inward. The adjustment reflected a subtle shift in priorities. The escorts themselves had become the key variables. Their reactions defined the limits of opportunity. If they remained fixed on protecting the merchants, attack options would remain narrow. If they were drawn outward or distracted, gaps would form. Shortly before midnight, one escort altered course to investigate a radar contact well off the convoy's track. The contact was likely another vessel or possibly a false return, but the escort's response was immediate. It increased speed and moved away from the merchants, leaving the remaining escort alone to cover both ships. O'Kane recognized the opening. He ordered increased speed and adjusted course to close distance quickly while the gap remained. The submarine advanced on the surface, keeping the remaining escort just outside immediate detection range. The maneuver carried risk. If the investigating escort returned quickly, or if the remaining escort detected Tang during the approach, the submarine would be exposed. O'Kane weighed the risk against the pattern observed throughout the patrol. Opportunities of this kind had been rare and brief. At approximately 1,500 yards, the silhouette of the nearer merchant vessel became visible through the periscope. O'Kane submerged to periscope depth to refine the firing solution. He selected a target that appeared to be a medium-sized cargo ship, moving steadily with minimal zigzagging. The remaining escort altered course slightly, but did not close. Sonar pings continued intermittently, but none were directed precisely. The escort's attention appeared divided, possibly monitoring the distant contact that had drawn its counterpart away. O'Kane ordered torpedoes set for a relatively short run. He intended to fire and withdraw quickly, rather than linger for observation. The decision reflected the changing balance of risk. Prolonged exposure increased the chance of detection, even if the initial attack succeeded. At just under 1,000 yards, Tang fired a spread of torpedoes. The firing was smooth, with no immediate indication of malfunction. O'Kane began a shallow turn away, preparing to dive deeper if necessary. The first explosion followed within moments. A second detonation occurred shortly afterwards. Through the periscope, O'Kane observed the merchant vessel slowing abruptly, smoke rising from its midsection. The remaining escort reacted immediately, increasing speed and turning toward the submarine's last known position. O'Kane ordered a deeper dive. Tang descended rapidly as sonar pings intensified. Depth charges detonated nearby, closer than previous encounters, but still not precisely targeted. The escort conducted a brief but aggressive search, dropping several patterns before moving off to rejoin the damaged merchant. The attack marked the patrol's first confirmed success. It also validated the revised approach. Observation and restraint had created a narrow window, and acting decisively within it had produced results. After several hours at depth, Tang surfaced cautiously to assess the situation. Radar indicated the damaged merchant had fallen behind and was no longer moving with the original formation. The escort that had pursued Tang was now circling the stricken ship, while the other escort was returning from its investigation. O'Kane considered the options. The damaged vessel remained afloat, but appeared vulnerable. However, the presence of two escorts reduced the feasibility of an immediate follow-up attack. The risk of counter-detection was high, especially after sonar contact had already been established. He chose to disengage temporarily, maintaining distance while monitoring developments. The decision reflected a growing emphasis on control rather than aggression.
The patrol's objective was not a single success, but sustained effectiveness within limited time. By dawn, the damaged merchant had slowed further and appeared to be listing slightly. The escorts remained close, but their movements suggested concern with the ship's condition rather than active hunting. Air patrols began to appear intermittently, limiting further action during daylight. O'Kane used the day to reposition. He remained submerged, tracking both the damaged ship and the broader shipping lane. Intelligence from the previous days suggested that additional traffic might pass through the area, possibly drawn toward the stricken ship to assist or replace it. As evening approached, radar detected new contacts. These appeared to be additional merchant ships moving along a similar route, possibly part of a staggered convoy system. Escort coverage was lighter than expected, with only one warship clearly associated with the new group. The operational picture had shifted. The earlier success had altered Japanese behavior locally, but not comprehensively. Traffic continued, and escort coverage remained uneven. Now O'Kane faced a different problem: how to exploit momentum without inviting concentrated retaliation. The patrol had reached a turning point. The accumulated observations, the initial attack, and the evolving response pattern suggested that further action was possible, but only with careful judgment. Each decision carried increasing weight as the margin for recovery narrowed with every engagement. Tang maneuvered into position as darkness fell, batteries charged and torpedo rooms ready. The crew understood that the patrol had entered a more active phase. The balance between caution and initiative would now determine whether the early success could be expanded or would remain isolated.
By the night of October 25, 1944, the operational environment around USS Tang had shifted in subtle but important ways. Japanese shipping continued to move through the Formosa Strait, but escort behavior reflected heightened sensitivity. Sonar sweeps were more frequent, and surface patrols lingered longer in areas where contacts had recently occurred. The success of the previous night had not gone unnoticed. Radar contacts shortly after sunset confirmed the presence of two merchant vessels moving independently rather than in a tight convoy. A single escort patrolled ahead of them, maintaining a modest lead. The arrangement suggested an attempt to reduce vulnerability by dispersing targets, a measure that complicated attack planning but also reduced mutual support among escorts. O'Kane evaluated the situation from the control room, reviewing plots and timing estimates. The patrol had reached a phase where each engagement increased scrutiny. Japanese commanders, even without full clarity on the number or identity of attacking submarines, tended to respond to losses with intensified local patrols. The longer Tang remained active in one area, the greater the risk of concentrated countermeasures. Despite this, the opportunity presented by lightly escorted traffic could not be ignored. O'Kane decided to attempt another surface approach, using the darkness to close distance while keeping options open for disengagement. The submarines surfaced well outside visual range and advanced at reduced speed. Radar sweeps kept brief and infrequent. As Tang closed, the escort altered course twice, each time returning to its original track after a short investigation. The behavior suggested uncertainty rather than confidence. O'Kane noted the pattern and adjusted course slightly to remain just beyond the escort's likely detection envelope. At approximately 2,000 yards, O'Kane submerged to periscope depth. The nearer merchant vessel was selected as the primary target. It appeared to be a tanker or transport, riding low in the water and maintaining steady speed. The second merchant followed several thousand yards behind, separated enough that a single escort could not cover both effectively. O'Kane ordered a narrow torpedo spread, intending to conserve weapons while maintaining a reasonable probability of hit. The firing solution was calculated quickly, using lessons learned from the previous engagement. The emphasis was on speed and decisiveness rather than perfect alignment. The torpedoes were fired, and Tang immediately began a turn away, descending to increase separation. Within moments, an explosion confirmed a hit. A second detonation followed, larger and more sustained, suggesting damage to fuel or cargo spaces. The escort reacted aggressively. Sonar contact was established more quickly than in the previous encounter, and depth charges were dropped in rapid succession. Several detonations were close enough to shake equipment and dislodge items within the boat.
O'Kane ordered further descent and evasive maneuvers, using changes in depth and course to disrupt the escort's solution. The depth charge attack persisted longer than earlier ones. The escorts circled repeatedly, dropping patterns that estimated Tang's position. The crew remained quiet, machinery secured to minimize noise. The pressure highlighted the increasing effectiveness of Japanese countermeasures when an escort committed fully to an attack. After nearly an hour, the intensity of the search diminished. The escort likely returned to the damaged merchant or shifted attention to the second vessel. O'Kane waited before bringing Tang back to periscope depth, cautious of lingering sonar coverage. When conditions allowed, he raised the periscope briefly. The attacked merchant was stopped, smoke rising steadily. The escort was nearby, signaling with lights, possibly coordinating assistance. The second merchant had altered course, moving away at increased speed. The situation presented a dilemma. The damaged ship was a clear target, but the escort's proximity and alertness made a follow-up attack hazardous. Additionally, prolonged presence increased the chance of additional escorts or air patrols arriving. O'Kane chose to disengage again, marking the position and withdrawing to a safer distance. The decision reflected restraint shaped by the patrol's evolving risks. The objective was not to exhaust torpedoes or press luck unnecessarily, but to maintain operational freedom. Over the next day, Japanese activity intensified. Multiple escorts were detected moving through the area, and air patrols increased in frequency. Radar contacts suggested coordinated searches rather than routine transit. The pattern indicated that Japanese commanders were reacting to cumulative losses, even if they did not yet understand their scale. Tang remained submerged for extended periods, limiting observation but reducing exposure. Battery consumption increased, and O'Kane monitored reserves carefully. The patrol was entering a phase where endurance and discretion were as important as aggression. Late on October 26th, as darkness fell, radar detected another group of contacts at long range. These vessels moved at higher speed and with tighter formation than earlier groups, indicating a more deliberate convoy. Escort presence appeared heavier, with at least 3 warships associated with the formation. O'Kane assessed the convoy and concluded that an immediate attack carried disproportionate risk. The escort's spacing and speed suggested readiness for anti-submarine action. Instead, he chose to shadow from a distance, gathering information while preserving the option to disengage. This decision was not without consequence. By remaining in the area, Tang increased the chance of detection through cumulative exposure, yet withdrawing entirely would forfeit opportunities that might arise if escort discipline weakened under the strain of extended operations. The tension between initiative and caution reached its peak during these hours. O'Kane's earlier successes had demonstrated that disciplined observation could yield results, but each additional engagement tightened the net. The system was adapting, even if imperfectly. As midnight approached, the convoy altered course unexpectedly, turning towards shallower waters closer to land. The maneuver reduced Tang's options and signaled that Japanese commanders were actively managing routes in response to perceived threats. O'Kane ordered a gradual withdrawal to deeper water, maintaining sonar and radar watch while increasing separation. The patrol had reached a critical juncture. The accumulated successes were offset by rising pressure, and the balance of risk was shifting. The boat remained undetected, but the environment had become less forgiving. The next phase would determine whether Tang could continue to operate effectively or whether the system arrayed against her would assert control.
In the early hours of October 27, 1944, USS Tang remained in the eastern approaches of the Formosa Strait. The patrol had already produced results beyond initial expectations. Within a span of several days, Japanese shipping losses in the area had increased sharply, and radio intelligence intercepted by American command later indicated confusion among Japanese naval staffs attempting to reconcile reports from local escorts. Merchant vessels were being lost in waters considered comparatively well protected, and in some cases, the escorts involved were reporting aggressive submarine behavior inconsistent with earlier assumptions. From Tang's perspective, the situation was less dramatic and more constrained.
Torpedo inventory had been reduced by successive engagements, battery reserves were under increasing strain, and Japanese patrol activity continued to intensify. The submarine had already remained in the patrol area longer than initially anticipated, and O'Kane was acutely aware that cumulative exposure increased the likelihood of detection. Shortly before dawn, radar detected a small group of vessels moving independently rather than as a formal convoy. Among them was a destroyer-class warship escorting a merchant vessel. The destroyer's profile suggested it was operating as both escort and patrol unit, a dual role increasingly common as Japanese resources were stretched. O'Kane evaluated the contact carefully. Destroyers were high-value targets, not only because of their combat capability, but also because of their role in anti-submarine warfare. Engaging one carried significant risk, but also the potential to disrupt Japanese defensive operations in the area. He ordered Tang into position for a submerged approach, intending to observe escort behavior before committing. From periscope depth, he tracked the destroyer's course and speed. Unlike earlier escorts, this vessel maintained a relatively straight track, suggesting either confidence or fatigue. Sonar activity was present, but not aggressive. As daylight approached, O'Kane faced a narrowing window. Remaining submerged through the day would limit maneuverability and battery life. Withdrawing would preserve the submarine, but forfeit a rare opportunity. After reviewing the firing solution, he decided to proceed. At close range, Tang fired a spread of torpedoes aimed at the destroyer. The submarine immediately began evasive maneuvers, descending and altering course. Within moments, an explosion was observed through the periscope, followed by another. The destroyer slowed rapidly, smoke rising from its forward section. The reaction was immediate. Sonar contact was established quickly, and depth charges followed in rapid sequence. The intensity exceeded earlier attacks. Explosions were closer, and pressure effects were felt throughout the hull. O'Kane ordered maximum evasive action within depth limits, using sharp turns and depth changes to complicate targeting. For nearly an hour, the destroyer, or possibly additional escorts responding to the attack, conducted a determined search. Tang remained quiet, machinery secured as much as possible. The crew held their positions, aware that survival depended on discipline and patience. Eventually, the attack subsided. Whether the damaged destroyer had been forced to withdraw or assistance had arrived could not be determined from Tang's position. When O'Kane cautiously raised the periscope later, the immediate area appeared clear. The attacked vessels were no longer visible. By Japanese records compiled after the war, the period between October 23 and October 27 saw at least 5 vessels sunk in the region by a single American submarine. These included merchant ships and escort vessels, losses that were difficult to reconcile with existing assessments of submarine threat levels in the area. Reports from escort commanders varied, some suggesting multiple submarines, others attributing losses to coordinated attacks that had not, in fact, occurred. For Tang, the situation was reaching its limit. Torpedoes were nearly expended, batteries required recharging, and Japanese patrol density was increasing. O'Kane began preparations to withdraw from the area and return towards safer waters. That decision was overtaken by events. Shortly before midnight on October 25-26, during a final surface engagement attempt under low visibility conditions, Tang fired her last torpedo at a target detected close aboard. The torpedo's initial run appeared normal. Seconds later, lookouts and bridge personnel observed an unexpected change in its track. The torpedo began a circular run. O'Kane ordered emergency maneuvers, but the distance was too short. The torpedo struck Tang near the aft section. The explosion was catastrophic. The submarine sank rapidly, leaving little time for organized escape. Of the 87 men aboard, 9 survived the initial sinking. They reached the surface amid debris and oil, clinging to flotation where possible. At dawn, Japanese vessels arrived in the area. The survivors were recovered and taken prisoner. O'Kane survived the sinking and subsequent capture. During interrogation, Japanese officers questioned him extensively about the submarine's patrol. According to post-war accounts, they expressed disbelief that a single submarine had inflicted the losses attributed to Tang in such a short period. The pattern did not align with their expectations of American submarine operations or the defensive measures they believed to be in place. O'Kane spent the remainder of the war as a prisoner, surviving captivity until Japan's surrender. After the war, his account of the patrol was reviewed alongside Japanese records, which confirmed the scale of the losses inflicted during those 4 days. In recognition of his leadership and actions, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. Within the broader institutional context, Tang's final patrol reinforced several lessons already emerging by late 1944. Japanese escort tactics, while improved, remained uneven in execution. Aggressive pressure could disrupt attacks, but gaps still appeared when escorts reacted independently rather than as coordinated units. Conversely, the patrol also underscored the inherent risks of close-range, high-tempo submarine operations, even when executed skillfully. For the U.S. Navy, the loss of Tang was a reminder that technical reliability remained a critical vulnerability. Circular running torpedoes were a known hazard, and additional safeguards were implemented as a result of incidents like this one. The lessons were institutional rather than dramatic, absorbed into training and procedure rather than public narrative. The legacy of Tang's final patrol is not defined by a single action, but by the accumulation of disciplined decisions made under pressure. In a matter of days, one submarine exposed persistent weaknesses in Japanese convoy defense, while also demonstrating the limits of individual initiative within a complex system of machines, doctrine, and chance. The story remained largely confined to patrol reports, interrogation records, and post-war analyses, known to specialists, rarely to the broader public. It stands as a record of how routine operations carried out methodically could produce outcomes that surprised even those tasked with understanding them. If you value careful, historically grounded accounts of overlooked actions and individuals, consider supporting work that preserves and examines these quieter chapters of history.